All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, From Resistance to Results, Integrating Digital into Your Business for Unified Commerce Success. I want to start by thanking everyone for joining us, whether you're live or watching a recording later. We appreciate your time and interest in this important conversation. We have a great discussion ahead of us today, and I'm pleased to be joined by two industry experts who bring valuable perspectives to this topic. Rather than introducing them myself, I'll let them do that. So Dennis, if you'd like to start.
Thanks very much, Scott. Hi, everybody. Delighted to be here and looking forward to the chat today, and delighted to be called an expert as well, Scott. Thanks for that. So some pressure applied to that. I'm Denis Clifford. I'm the Chief Customer Officer with Virto Commerce. Virto Commerce are an e-commerce technology company, and I've been working in e-commerce for companies like Heineken for about the last 20 years almost, as much as I'm afraid to admit it. So delighted to be here. Thanks, Scott.
Yes. And Jacobi.
Thanks, Scott. Everyone, Jacobi Zakrzewski, excited to be here today as NAED is near and dear to my heart. Having previously served as a tech exec at a sizable electrical distributor and also NAED member. For those unfamiliar with Luminos Labs, we're a digital commerce systems integrator, been around for about 15 years. Our expertise is helping ambitious B2B and direct-to-consumer businesses make digital solutions work. So we work closely with Virto Commerce and other platforms, PIMS, Commerce, Search, CMSs, etc., all happily integrated with your back office systems. If nothing else, I suppose you can think of us as like the pragmatic blue-collar technologist, making sure we co-create a solution with you and for your customers. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you both for those insights into a little bit about you. For those that don't know me, Scott Wagner, Director of Industry Transformation at NAED. I lead NAED's Digital Center of Excellence, and our goal really is to help our members level up with either their understanding or use of technology. I've been with NAED, it's a year this month, but I've got 35 years in the industry as an electrician, working for Schneider Electric and 3 major distributors along the way. So I'll also be serving as the moderator for today's talk and helping guide the conversation around how businesses can overcome resistance to digital adoption and move toward real measurable success. And I want to talk a little bit about our format today so you know what to expect. We'll be covering 4 key questions that will frame our discussions around the challenges and opportunities with digital transformation. We'll also dive into a case study that highlights a real-world application and success. And finally, we'll wrap up with some key takeaways to ensure that you leave with actionable insights. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump right in, and I'll go ahead and advance our slides here. Please, if you wouldn't mind, guys, confirm you see the screen and it's advancing for you.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Yeah. So our first question, if distributors apply digital now rather than later, what are the positive advantages?
All right, I'll take a first stab at this. So I think it's interesting, a lot of the words used in some of the questions here, and the word apply comes to mind. And I think, Scott, your experience going to distributors, Dennis, your experience working with distributors in the past, all of them, in the audience here, you use the word apply in different ways. So number one, just on the spectrum of things, just awareness and education, all the way to straight up neck deep, full adoption and optimization. And so I think that the first thing that I would talk about here is applying it now can come in the way of just awareness and education. And Scott, you and the team do that as part of your role. And those of you on the call often see case studies and white papers among certain distributors who are quite digitally advanced. And just know that those are the folks that are maybe the exception to the rule oftentimes. And if you think you are maybe behind, I'd like to say you might actually be above average in a lot of ways in the grand scheme of things. So oftentimes organizations look at this as we need to go from 0 to 100, but even just starting at step 1 is really important. So just the mindset shift beyond the technology itself is a very big step. And then we'll talk a little bit about the other tangible positive advantages, but just that mindset is really important to start the snowball effect.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Jacobi. I think the other piece here is like if there's any sense of, we don't need to move now, or we don't need to digitize now. That may be because, the customers haven't necessarily expressed their explicit desire to say, hey, we should be doing something with you digitally. I should be able to see, all of my transactions, my credit history. I should be able to pay all my bills online, whatever it might happen to be. But in my experience, sometimes the market and customer requirements move almost invisibly, almost until they're at a point where somebody else is coming into that space and beginning to provide those kind of services they need. So I've worked with distributors in the drinks industry a lot, and that's definitely a factor. So, distributors really feeling as though they're capturing the need and the requirement of their customer base for today, but then being somehow surprised when somebody's providing a more, let's say, immediate, fast, and digital service, and needing to scramble to catch up with that. So I know our discussion here is about, if we do it now rather than later, what are the advantages? I guess I would come at this more from we absolutely should be doing this now, because if you don't, somebody else is going to do it for you, almost.
Yeah, I think there's some of the conversations I'm having, people are asking where to start. And some of the advice I've been giving is really just talking about it internally. I've seen examples of building small councils within a company to kind of bubble up where they're seeing things or the ideas in the organization, but also the important critical step of experimentation and piloting. What other things do you recommend for that first step?
100%, Scott. We see this a lot, and Jacobi, I know you do as well, but there is definitely that sense of, if I'm running a fairly traditional business, and by the way, my background's in the beer business, you're not going to get a whole lot more traditional than that, right? So just to kind of illustrate the point a little bit, I think, I worked for Heineken in Amsterdam for many years, and from a, let's say, digital marketing perspective and a digital consumer perspective, some of the very best in class. But actually, from a B2B perspective and dealing with, customers who are, bar owners, distributors, wholesalers of drinks, the same sort of business model has applied for, maybe 30 years. Sales rep goes out, collects the order, phones it back to the office, it gets delivered. So I see this all the time, but sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming to say, how do we take all of that and digitize it? And I think, Scott, your point, well, don't actually start small. Do something that that's manageable, you'll get some tangible benefits from, but prepare yourself to scale it really, really quickly. So think big, but start small and scale really quickly. That's kind of how to sort of bite that off, if you like, in my experience anyway.
Yeah. I mean, in a prior life, listen, I worked for a 105-year-old company. You don't get to be 105 years old by accident. Okay.
No.
It took a long time to get to that point, and the reality is it's going to take a long time to get to the next stage. Things don't happen between a Monday and a Tuesday in reality, especially in complex B2B organizations. And so I kind of view this just starting by getting on the hamster wheel. A lot of people view maybe digital transformation, the buzzword, as a beginning and an end, but I view it as a perpetual hamster wheel in a long ways. And that doesn't mean you need to run, again, 100 miles an hour. It just means getting on and slowly walking. Scott, as you mentioned, awareness, a little bit of assessment, piloting, do some expansion. And before you know it, you're in full-blown adoption mode. It shouldn't feel like something that was a massive change from one day to another. It kind of happens naturally with progression over the course of time, and suddenly you're there, however you define there. So I think the major risk for distributors is, not doing anything is probably kind of a behavior you don't want to exhibit. And so standing still, I think, is a risk. So moving in a direction, it may not be perfectly correct all the time, but moving in a direction is positive.
Yeah.
There's a keyword that you
Sorry,
said in
Scott.
there, Jacobi, that and also links into what Dennis said that triggered something in my mind that, I'm a big believer in an approach of crawl, walk, run. Dennis, you said start with something small, something you know really well, that you
Yeah.
understand the dynamics of and your people are comfortable with, and then iterate over time. You can make big leaps forward at times, but a constant continual evolution is really probably a safer way to go. And at times it's going to enable those big leaps later because it becomes part of your culture. I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
The last thing I would mention is we could certainly sit here and talk about stats like, hey, if you invest in digital commerce and do these things, you'll have, let's say, a 15 to 25% lower cost to serve on very transactional types of order entry. We could talk all day about those things, but I think just that culture and mindset part are a precursor to success in a lot of ways for those things downstream, because those become very tactical business as usual metrics. But the soft, intangible things is some of the harder opportunities to work through and takes time to marinate.
For sure, for sure. Dennis, any other thoughts on this before we move to the next question?
Just I'm maybe just conscious of trying to answer the question maybe a little bit more directly in a sense, and just listening to both of you talking and some of the things that's top of mind, thinking about these positive advantages. I think there's a sort of a resilience built into going digital and a future proofing, that happens. For all of the good reasons around, potentially, reducing some of your costs and all the rest of it. So the sooner you start doing that, I think, the better. So that's definitely one. Paradoxically, you might not think this, but there's a proximity to your customer that happens through digital because of the way in which you have to look at data and insights. So rather than doing some sort of gut analysis on what your customers or your buyers are doing, you're doing it really based on data. So it actually does bring you closer to them, provided you've got some sort of way to action those. It's definitely a way to expand your services, and I think that's probably something we'll talk about a little bit later on. It's a lighter lift to bolt on new services, new products, etc. in digital than it is sort of in the offline world. And I would say it's great to get some of the change management and some of the learning done early. Do you know what I mean? My father-in-law had a great expression. He used to say, "Well, you'll never learn something younger," depending on what the topic was. And I think you could apply that here. The sooner you do it, you'll never learn earlier about what you need to do. So just a couple of other little random thoughts that are going through my head.
Very good. Very good.
Dennis, you just scratched my brain there for a second. Scott, I know one of the important things for NAED initiative wise is kind of tackling the aging workforce. How do these things with the question and that coincide? Dennis, you had a sentence there that really scratched that, but where do these come together, those two topics?
Yeah, I think, that we're having a lot of discussion around what happens when folks retire and we don't have enough people to fill those spots going forward. And also, there's a huge amount of demand present today and also emerging in the electrical industry. So we've got really two big problems that are kind of facing off along with this challenge of technology. And I really believe the answer is efficiency through use of better tools. There's things like the learning curve it takes to get someone, an example, a counter sales job up to speed is, the conversations I've had, it's about 2 years to really get someone truly effective. And a lot of it is around product knowledge and understanding part numbers and how to operate a system. So how do we enable a shorter learning curve? Technology helps us do that, or having partnering good people with good tools, I think is the way we'll get there. And I think that's all technology.
I'm relatively certain digitalization and the internet probably aren't going away anytime soon. So
we've got to face those things head on. In talking through this first question, I think it really is a perfect segue into the next, which is, if distributors are going to go out and embark on a digital initiative, what can they do to ensure success?
Yeah, it's so ensuring success, I guess I'd be a little, uncomfortable because there's no guarantees in any project. So let's take that. Let's just point out that obvious point is the first thing. There's a whole load of stuff here. I probably should have said it at the beginning. Like, I work for an e-commerce technology company, but I'm not on the technology side of the business at all. I leave that to far cleverer people than me, that's for sure. But my background is very much in the sort of customer success, project success space. I'm really interested in customer centricity. I'm really interested in how digital tools help businesses to achieve their objectives and things like that. So I look at it more from a business process perspective. And I started my career answering the phones and call centers and things like that. So, and I've done a lot of different things in relationship to that. There's a few principles and fundamentals, I think, around this that would help. And they're more about mindset, which Jacobi mentioned earlier on. One of them is that it's a whole business thing. Uh, it isn't a digital project. It is a business project with a very high technology component. But I would always say it needs to be led from the business. The technology needs to go in the direction that your business wants to go in. You're not going to go in a particular direction just because the technology has that feature or it can do that thing, whatever that thing might happen to be. The other is that it's a change management project. And I'm sure, your members, like a lot of other companies that I've worked with, are brilliant at adapting to change. They're running change projects all the time, whatever that might happen to be. And this is another one of those. So all of those sort of learned um, kind of habits around running a good project in your business, that all still applies for digitizing. We mentioned already about thinking big, but starting small and scaling fast. That's really an important component for success. Um, and the other one, and I'll finish with this, and I'm interested to hear Jacobi's take on all of these, is um, it's really about, and this is terribly cliched, but it's true, you really have to keep the customer at the heart of it. If you're going out to do a digital project, go out and ask all of your, contractors or whoever it happens to be you're working with, what are you struggling with at the moment? What's difficult in your business? What can we do to make that easier? And that's the bit you digitize. Don't be building out features that are not going to get used. Make sure it's really rooted in what your customer needs. Um, and there is one more. It is, as Jacobi said, it is not something that has a start and an end. It's a continuum. So it's like puppies at Christmas. They're for life. They're not just for December and January. These projects are like that.
Puppies for life. Yeah. So Dennis, great points. And I started at a very different end of the spectrum here, in my IT career, plugging in printers, routers, switches, firewalls, unsexy things. Okay. But it grounded a lot of things in reality. I've been underneath so many dusty counters you wouldn't imagine. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of times in B2B, and this is where I get a little soapboxy. So Scott Wagner, mute the heck out of me if I get crazy here. Um, and a lot of times in B2B, we treat things as if they're analog, meaning true, false, pass, fail, black, white, 1, 0. If I configure a warehouse printer and plug it in, does it print? Yes, no, pass, fail. But these digital things are so beyond technology and our culture and empowerment and people and processes that there's a big gray area here. And so I think ultimately, sometimes organizations who go through a big project, let's say implementing a new e-commerce platform, even if 1 or 2% doesn't work, sometimes it's seen as a failure. We tend to ignore the other 98, 99% sometimes because we focus on the things that didn't work. But I think focusing on the positives is number one important. Number two here, every distributor that I work with at the beginning of a large initiative, product, or project is ultimately defining what success looks like to your business. Fast forward 6, 9 months, what does success look like for you and your business? And I think you'll find those types of questions among a stakeholder group. Sometimes there's dissonance between stakeholders about what that looks like. And so defining what success looks like is really important. Number one, technically, but number two, more importantly, uh, from the business and the customer's experience perspective. So then, as to one of your other points, I think two ways to look at digital initiatives are inside out versus outside in.
Mhm.
B2B organizations tend to focus almost inside. How am I going to help finance do their job or the warehouse do their job better? But then at the end of the chain is the customer versus thinking about the customer first and then working your way inside the business. And I think there's a mix of both that have to happen. Don't get me wrong, but I think that's a big piece. Last but not least, just a general clear strategy and roadmap. Now, the roadmap isn't something you do a retreat on for a weekend and come back and say, this is it for perpetuity. At least something to unify yourself around from a North Star perspective or North Star's perspective tends to work really well because at the end of the day, e-commerce and digital is such a cross-functional kind of initiative and we're all here and we all have a job because we're here for the customer. Sometimes I think we forget that we're all on the same team sometimes when it gets to certain things. And so just starting with a clear directive, roadmap, strategy, North Star to align everyone on is a fantastic way to kind of bring yourself back to the status quo and what reality is. So a lot of that's just a big piece here of defining success. Again, started out as an IT guy, right? I plug it in and it works. Getting things technically to work is way different than it working for the business. Way different. Okay.
For sure. And something you guys are making me think about, the role of change management in this and, focusing on the customer is extremely important, but also not forgetting the people that take care of the customer day to day. It's funny how that can manifest that they'll actually resist change because they're protecting the customer from the disruption sometimes that can occur. So involvement of your people early, them having a voice, I think, or it's like grease on the skids of implementation and this change management process so you can be successful, letting them in on what's going on so that they can help.
Yeah, a former CEO of mine, it's seared into my brain, would constantly say, Jacobi, let's make sure we do it with them, not to them, over and over
Right.
and over again. And I know that can feel exhausting. I know. Okay, but it is absolutely necessary and worth the time and investment because if you try to do this alone, it just won't work. It will feel like death by a thousand paper cuts every day. And so it's worth the investment planting those seeds. And some of that growth is underneath the soil, right? Some of that growth is underneath the soil, and you're not going to see it pop up after until a certain amount of time. So,
There's the other thing that's floating around in my head, chaps, is the idea about, who within the business from a organization perspective should be leading, digital projects. And we were talking about it being, it's business led and all the rest of it. So certainly for, any of the business leaders who, members who are joining or people listening to the recording. And I say this far away enough from any technical colleagues so they can't kick me under the table. But I really do want to reinforce that point. This shouldn't really be technically led. There's a major partnership piece, but it has to go in the direction that the business leaders believe that it should. And the other point that I didn't make earlier, but I think is important, and we sometimes forget about it, is you've really got to inform and invite and engage with the users, with the people you intend to have using the platform. So you can't build it and then all of a sudden the thing is just going to start running, miraculously all on its own and independently. It isn't. You have to have a team of people who are going to run it. It needs, data, raw materials, products, all that stuff has to go into it. And you have to have a group of people who are communicating to the users to say, listen, we've just launched this amazing new platform. You need to try it out. Here's the great stuff you can do. And when they've started to use it, asking them, well, what did you think of it? Like, did it work for you? Did the order come on time? Brilliant. Will you use it next week? Tell your colleagues about it, all that kind of stuff. And we kind of forget about it a little bit because that's the kind of, I won't say kind of old fashioned, but maybe the analog, Jacobi, to use your, term. That's kind of the analog part of the project in a sense. But it's hugely important. If you don't do it, it'll, the thing won't fly. So yeah, I just wanted to make that point as well for your members.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And, I was recently talking with an NAED member who implemented a technical project, and he felt like the key for involving the people and having the right people lead the team were the ingredients for success. And actually felt like because of that approach, it enables the next thing. Everyone is ready to go. They feel like, well, that was good. We did that together. What can we do next? So it
Yeah.
starts to shift the mindset a bit. And I think, Dennis, what you said, it makes me think about those are all ingredients in a recipe. And if we're cooking dinner, we're trying to make that thing that we've made before and everyone loved. If we miss an ingredient, it kind of ruins the meal, right? So all of those things are really intentional and important for success. And we're talking about how do we ensure success? I think it's increased likelihood of success, and it's having the right ingredients.
yeah. I mean, a lot of this, by the way, kind of that we're talking about, I get asked probably on a weekly basis to one of the original points of who should lead e-commerce or digital. And it's such a hard question sometimes. And I don't think the short answer is it's not a title. Okay.
Mhm.
The short answer, in my opinion, very strongly opinionated about this, is it's not a title. my kind of sarcastic but serious answer here, it's the person who is most liked and is the most cross-functional business partner in the business. Because this initiative is so cross-functional, and sometimes that's the IT person because technology is a common denominator in business, oftentimes as if it's water or air. Sometimes it's the lead sales, person. But it's less about a title and more about kind of where they are functionally and how they operate in the business. And sometimes it's operational folks, that because maybe closer to the ground, things like that. Um, and then the second kind of caution flag that I see here in terms of, increasing likelihood of success is, and this is going to sound counterintuitive working where I do, but it's maybe sometimes organizations over rely on third party expertise in terms of carrying the weight. At the end of the day, Luminos Labs' logo or Virto Commerce's logo is not on your website. It's your logo. And so I think just utilizing your internal expertise, because you probably have more than you realize, is important. And then supplemented with the gaps that you may have. And so I see that a lot is this is a long-term thing. And so you want to invest your own internal accountability and responsibility as much as possible early on versus being over-reliant maybe on someone outside of your organization. Again, sounds counterintuitive coming from me, but I do think that's the right way to sustain success.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Jacobi, and it speaks to the idea of partnership, that you can't hand over something this important to someone and really hope for success. It's the combination of your great team and a great partner that helps ensure success.
Mhm.
Yeah.
In order to do that, and just your on that point, it's good to understand what are the capabilities you need, so you can draw that line between what Jacobi said. You'd have a lot of skills and talent in your team that can do this, and you will, but maybe not all. So good to have that capability matrix. At Virto Commerce, we work with a lot of customers to try and build that up. We don't solve all of those problems, but we recognize how important it is. So understanding what are the roles I need to make it work, what do I have internally, what's the gap I need to fill, and there may be a short term, work with third parties, but long term you need to build that capability in, as Jacobi said. So yeah, good.
Excellent, excellent. Any other thoughts before we move to the third question?
Oh, good.
All right. And by the way, we're right on time. I think we're right at our midpoint. I think we're doing well and having some good discussion, so we'll keep that going.
Cool.
So the next point we have here is, can distributors realistically expect short-term ROI on digital? And if not, why is it a long game?
I'm gonna answer this with that first question. I'm gonna just give a hard no. I don't know that we can expect a short-term ROI, and this is gonna sound a little scary, but I don't know that we can, or we have to be realistic about it. Now, the answer could be yes, so that no has an asterisk on it. If we were looking to massively shift offline revenue to online over the span of a very short timeline, I think the answer could be yes. Generally speaking, that's not how it's going to actually work, though. And what you'd have to do with that is reduce expenses at the same time. That's a little bit of an assumed thing in the equation here. And so a lot of B2B side, it's all about, risk mitigation, things like that. So I answer with no. And I think that's the realistic standpoint, but I think over the course of time, the answer is yes. So at the end of the day, I kind of focus on it being an opportunity cost versus an ROI conversation to begin. As I mentioned towards the beginning, a lot of this is cultural, mindset, process oriented things of planting the seed, and no sprouts are going to be seen above that soil for a certain amount of time. When those sprouts start to occur, that's when you're going to start to see that like revenue and margin, increase, things like that, lower cost to serve, operational things happening. But I think at the end of the day, for organizations who are on those first initial stages of digitalization or digital, you're going to put in a fair amount of upfront investment just to get the foundation going. There was a study done by Deloitte about a year and a half ago that said mid-market and enterprise distributors, when they're first starting, spend 2 to 6% of their annual revenue just to get started. Now, for a large distributor, that's a fair amount of digits Okay, that's a fair amount
Sure.
of digits, and it seems crazy. And then after that, the perpetual wheel starts, and then the OpEx, CapEx goes down, OpEx starts to even out a little bit, and you've got that flywheel going. Okay, but there's an initial upfront investment that seems a little scary in the red unless you make some massive organizational changes overnight, which again, just normally isn't done and is too risky for the business in a lot of ways. So that's how I will start answering the question because I think that's the pragmatic and realistic way to look at it.
Yeah, well said, Jacobi. I'd really agree. And I'm glad you said that about, probably no is kind of what I heard from it. Can you expect short-term ROI? Probably not unless you do something, significant. And is that a good thing or not? Just to shift everything online all of a sudden. So I'm glad you said that. Um, the other thing I would say about it is that, and we mentioned this earlier on, like this is if you have, a strong offline business. And shifting that to online is not kind of a little project that sits in the corner. It's your overall business. So it doesn't really work like, a lot of ROI initiatives where you say, right, am I going to get my money back in 3 years? You're really transforming your business here in a fundamental way. And you need to do it. There's an existential sort of component to this, not to be telling people to be frightened of it, but you need to make a move in the space if you aren't already. If your customers don't want it now, they're going to want it very soon. Um, the other thing is that there are, at least in my experience and in working with Virtual Commerce, this is what I see, 5 or 6 major sort of drivers around the business case. We've mentioned reducing your cost to serve. That's definitely there. Increasing your top line. So you have the ability to sell more and sell more of other things using digital tools more easily than you can offline. There is a competitive advantage piece here. Um, at Virto, we like to say, if you win the experience, you win the market. So everybody's price sensitive, contractors price sensitive, everybody's price sensitive, but only up to a point where the service, the speed of delivery, the product range, the people I work with all meet my expectations. After that, I get a little bit less price sensitive if that's not there. So there is a competitive advantage in these digital business cases as well. It's very hard to quantify and put a number on it, but for sure it is there. Data and personalization is another one. You think you know your customers, and I'm sure your members know them intimately well, but the level of information about what they order, when they order it, what frequency they order it in, and all the rest of it, you will have access to data you've never had before, and you can start to adjust your service to that in new ways. That's also part of it, but very hard to quantify. And the last two, one is the customer satisfaction piece. So it's a bit related to competitive advantage, but you can make your customers happier faster in a sense via digital. And the final piece is there is we definitely see it in projects now, a kind of sustainability piece. So, reducing order errors, reducing having to redeliver. If some of our customers are exploring marketplace concepts, for example, so they can, drop ship products in from other locations without having to take them into warehouses, which reduces CO2 and so on. So the business case around digital and that return on investment is multifaceted and very hard sometimes to throw your arms around and really understand it. So delighted Jacobi broke the ice and said kind of no at the beginning. And I'm kind of following up saying there's a whole load of stuff that's a benefit there that you might not even see initially. But if you think about it broadly enough, for sure it's there.
So we've said like we can't treat it as an IT project. We probably shouldn't treat it as a finance project either. So it ends up being kind of a strategic imperative, in my opinion, in a lot of ways. And so some of this is just maintaining competitiveness and making the business more resilient in a lot of ways. But Scott, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I think, for me, you just hit the point right on the head that it's these kinds of, if people just think of this as, well, this is this thing we're doing over here that's going to just be its own thing rather than it's a part of our business now and it's going to help us evolve. It reaches into everything you do in some form or fashion. And I think, Dennis, what you said about understanding the data and how things are changing while you're implementing, you could have downstream impacts in your warehouse if your order profiles start to evolve to a smaller, group of orders. That may change the way you warehouse and fulfill orders. Your supplier relationships could evolve with different partners. And again, we need to keep our eye on the ball and be intentional about change management in these processes. And it's not just about the people, it's about the process and how it impacts the overall business. But I don't think it's I would look at this the same way I would if a distributor has a specialized sales department for some really small vertical, and everybody kind of looks at them as they're their own thing, and let's just let them do what they do, rather than integrating them into the process and enjoying success together. Same thing applies here.
Scott, you mentioned earlier on about piloting, and there's a whole lot of technologies out there that are quite easy to get stood up and running, at least from a innovation piloting, don't have to change the whole business kind of mindset. I do believe some of those other technologies and platforms and small business process changes do have high ROI, individually speaking. In the grand scheme of things, it's hard to quantify, but you break it down into one small thing like automated order entry or like transitioning POs into EDI, things like that. I think those individually have very high ROI, no doubt. But then you add in more and more, it starts to get a little muddier. But Scott, maybe you could kind of speak to one or two of the things out at members today where you're seeing some piloting going on and it's benefiting the business, maybe hard or soft cost.
Yeah, I think probably the quote automation is the biggest domain where people are trying things. Companies are seeing that ROI, or at least the potential for it, that it's real. The other is really the idea and access to information through AI and large language models. Getting beyond just experimenting with it, finding a way to apply it to your business in a safe way. So that's actually something we're focused on in NAED, is drawing some industry experience and helping people understand, take away, demystify the topic. But I also think that, there's so many little things we talk about that they end up in that safe space where it's, well, we can do this and there's a clear ROI, let's do that. So we kind of cherry pick those opportunities, and we're not thinking about the long game. That's why I think this question is really important, is I think those topics will run out eventually. There are only so many high ROI, quick kill things you can do before you really need to think about evolving your business. And I think about the history of e-commerce or people standing up a website in our space, that a lot of the interest stopped at, well, now we have the catalog is online. So where when I was an inside guy, the shelf behind me was full of books. And now those books are digital, they're online. And that's not the measure of e-commerce in my mind. It's being able to transact in a new way. And I think, in a past conversation, we talked about the state of B2B and B2C expectations. They're closer together today than they ever have been before, and that will continue to happen. I think at some point we'll look at them very much the same way. And that's a generational thing as well. I think some of the folks that are coming into the business, their expectations around being able to do self-service and order on demand and check stock and things in a way that aren't normal to picking up the phone the way we used to do it historically. So to me, again, there's short-term things. Those will run out over time. We'll have to dig deeper if we want to continue to extract value and be relevant.
Yeah, and in B2B, something I focus a lot on, and I think other distributors do more and more, is, like you said, Scott, a lot of companies start with just getting the catalog online, price, maybe some inventory stuff, and they call it good there, as if that's the end of the game. But in the reality, I find that the best way to adoption sometimes, and this is a hard ROI to quantify, is, well, what if we build a highly integrated e-commerce experience for current customers to log in and see their open invoices, credit history, if you're doing job management, those types of things, just helping. Whereas before they might have called Jim, their inside sales guy, their quotations guy, they might have sent an email. How do we measure that ROI of just website utilization, of logging in and managing your business? That's very hard to do.
It is.
But I think not doing it is a concern. And so let's pretend, if you are very digitally mature and you're on this call, pretend, what does your world look like if your digital experience doesn't exist? It's probably a little scary, actually. And so I think that's a precursor in a lot of ways. And so it's not just about revenue and transactions. It goes about who you are as a business and how you work as a business with your customers, beyond buying a Q 120 that you may do every day. That kind of thing.
You have to, in that sense, or in that case, in my experience, you have to measure the customer satisfaction, the sentiment somehow. There's a lot of tools, many of them imperfect out there. But you've got to keep speaking to your customers about the experience that they're generating. It is really hard. It's a great point, actually, Jacobi, about, the kind of portal aspect of it, going in and kind of managing my business, like what's happening there. Sure, we don't really know. You can measure the page visits, but that's the sentiment bit. That's really, really important to do. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
I was working with a mid-sized distributor last year, and they just went live earlier this year on new platform, things like that. And one of my first questions again was, how are you guys going to measure success? And their first word was utilization. And I genuinely smiled because they weren't like, well, we want to increase revenue by 350% online. Man, okay. There's different ways to accomplish either of those goals, in a lot of ways. But when they said utilization, their mindset was, this is a long-term investment. We don't expect this to return the CapEx to be positive in the next 3 months. We know that we have to do this as a foundation, and this is a long-term play for us. Yes, we'll get first downs, but this is a long game. Okay, this is a long game. And so I was very happy to hear those types of things. And sometimes that requires a little bit of education, informity. But again, back to our other question, how are we going to measure success? Is it dollars? Is it customer satisfaction? Is it utilization of logins, registrations, things like that?
Yeah, it is definitely multifaceted, and the measurement piece, that has been the challenge in the past that I've seen, being a former analytics guy. It kind of devolves to things like clicks that are an important piece of the puzzle, but they're not the whole story for sure. Participation is important, but are we leading our customers to the right place? Are they getting the answers they need? Are they understanding their opportunities? And when do we interact personally rather than through a portal? That's really kind of some of the trade-offs and issues.
Yeah. I mean, it's about simple stuff, really, from a principal's perspective, isn't it? Is it being used? Is our revenue at least as good as it would have been offline, and hopefully more? Are people coming back to it again and again? And are they happy? And we can argue the toss then about the different, KPIs and all the other things that we're measuring. But if we can say all of those things, oh, and it's not costing us too much to do, then they're the right principles to be measuring, and we can do balanced scorecards till cows come home and all sorts of other fancy things to measure that stuff. But those are the principles, in a sense, I think. Utilization, revenue, returning visits, happy customers, costs are reasonable. Yeah.
And there's a comment here made by somebody to us as panelists that I thought was fantastic, and I'd like to call it out a little bit. I'm not going to call you out by name unless you want me to. But at the end of the day, it comes down to digital doesn't necessarily fall on any one responsibility of any department or person, but feels marketing and digitals can help increase the adoption, things like that. I think it's all a fantastic point, because here's a component that gets forgotten. All distributors are selling some type of widgets, whether it's a switchgear, pipe, wire, conduit, whatever it is, you're selling a widget. But this whole digital side is a product of a product. This digital experience is a product of your company. And by nature, it is a tool, it is an asset your sales folks can utilize versus being seen as a separate channel. It drives me a little crazy when I see organizations separating revenue by channel as if that's the beginning and end of everything. But I love it when I see, Scott, to one of your other points, newer counter sales folks who are younger, who don't know all the products, when I see them using the website as their catalog because search is good, product data is good, always room for improvement there. But when I see that being used as their system versus the ERP, I know things are trending in the right direction. And again, generational type of thing going on here. But I think treating digital and e-commerce as a product of your products is just, again, a mindset thing that tends to go really well when you repeat it. Thanks for that comment, by the way.
Absolutely right. That is a great comment. And you make me think of something, Jacobi, that the measure of a good counter person, if we're focused on that role for a minute, was they could memorize the catalog, or they knew how to find any part number in the system. And if you think about that today, for you guys on this panel or anyone listening, how many phone numbers do you know by heart anymore? But you can call anyone you need to, right? Because you have better tools. Your phone has that information. So it's, kind of analogous to what we're talking about, that if we have good tools, and good people, the partnership of those two things, we can be successful. And I don't think it exists in one silo. To the point made in the chat, you got to think about it as a business. So great discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else on this topic before we move to our fourth and final topic?
No.
All right. So thinking about disruption, how do distributors manage disruption to their benefit? How can we engineer an outcome in our favor?
Yeah,
We should spend an hour on each of these questions. Gosh darn it. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a creativity component to this in a sense. Like I think one of the strengths of taking your business online, we mentioned earlier on, or expanding the amount of your business that you do online, is it allows you to experiment and test and learn and try, little disruptions to see if they stick and then make them bigger. We were talking about, think big, start small, scale fast, and all that. So I think you can create disruption more easily online than offline and test things out. But it does require a bit of creativity, and your proximity to your customers are key, because that's where you can start to identify the things that some of your dare I say it, competitors are potentially not doing that you can do, and then start to create that little bit of disruption in a sense. And I think services are key to all of this, not just products, if you know what I mean. Now, Scott and Jacobi, you are much closer to this industry and to the members, and probably some of the people who will listen back to this than I am, most certainly. But from my experience in working with distributors and wholesalers in the drinks industry, that proximity to the customer means that you have a sort of a credibility or authority to try new things with a degree of trust involved. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. We often get a little hung up on the whole, well, jeepers, if I try this and it doesn't work, that's going to be terrible. Actually, if you try this and it doesn't work, well, it just didn't work. We'll try something else, if you know what I mean. So I think I would imagine that your members and participants and listeners back to this would have quite an intimate relationship with some of their customers. They've got the proximity, so they can try things, they can try and be disruptive online. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, that's okay. That's my sort of opening comment on that one anyway.
One of the unique things about distribution and why a lot of people don't think it's sexy, but I love it, is that distributors are in the middle of the physical supply chain, which also means it's a unique advantage to be in the middle of the information and data supply chain at the same time. All of you on this call are probably likely aware of what our industry looks like, as distributors. There's a lot of consolidation, there's a lot of M&A, there's a lot of third-party things going on. And I think one of the aspects of that disruption is really honing in on a single topic, and it is what makes you special and unique as a distributor yourself. Some of you may be national distributors, some more regional, some more local. Some of you may focus on industrial versus construction. There's something unique about you. And one of the questions that I love asking people that you can ask yourself is, if our business as a distributor were to disappear tomorrow, how likely and how quickly can our competitors do what we do and do it well? And with that question, you start to hone in on what makes you special as an organization beyond just taking things from, a rack in a warehouse and plopping them on a job site. Okay. A lot of companies can do that kind of thing, but if you've existed for a while, there's something special about you. And so I think honing in on that, whether that's job management, your project engineering, your application engineering, your VMI, your personal touch with your sales folks, and your proximity and your relevance, as Dennis mentioned, is all relatively important. And then taking all those things that makes you special and unique, like a snowflake, and creating the digital version of it is very special. As Scott mentioned, it's very easy, and I say easy, relatively speaking, to throw up a catalog and make a website and put it online. Again, a lot of people can do that. But you want to go those very, very far next steps of, man, what would it look like if we could allow our customers to release material for this job 24/7 just by our customers logging in versus calling up Jim, that kind of thing. They're still going to call Jim. trust me. But for those very basic things, Jim doesn't want to be available 24/7 despite his, aptitude or drive long term. And so I think being in the middle of the information supply chain is a competitive advantage combined with what makes you unique as a distributor, and making the digital version of that creates a lot of sustained success over the course of time. And I know some of this stuff is like, man, what are we going to do? Well, if you've been around for a while, think about what kept you relevant for a while, and let's keep doing that.
For sure. Something that makes me think about, there's a lot of, I would call it fear among people to adopt AI, thinking about that. And what you just talked about, Jacobi, I think if you take a very strong, experienced person and you enable them with a tool or a capability that allows them to be 100% effective. If they were 98% before, now they're 100%, that's a leap. But you think about somebody you're onboarding who's they're there in their first year, and through really good tools, they can reach the same level of effectiveness as that long-term expert in a really short window. That adds value to your customer. It adds value to everyone on the team. Your capabilities grow. And I saw a quote recently, and I shared this with you guys, and I think this might be the right place to throw it in, that, if there's fear that AI, or you can insert the buzzword technology, whatever it may be, if that would replace you, that's not likely, but it is more likely that your competitor using that thing might. So I think in this, how do we manage disruption? Let's be on the leading edge of adoption and be the one that's disrupting rather than being disrupted.
100%.
Yeah. And the reality of a lot of this too is just making those steps again with intention and awareness is important. We don't have to, as distributors, we don't have to be on the bleeding edge. Listen, we're not sending rockets to space here. Okay. But being on the leading edge and leaning forward versus being on your heels is actually a really important step. And again, the piloting and things like that are all relatively important. You don't have to treat some of these initiatives or projects, again, if it's pass or fail, and go all in on something. I think the reality of being agile with a lowercase a here is important, and just trying things and seeing if they work and they don't work is way better than not doing anything and just saying, well, if we let the world move around us, maybe everyone else won't do well and we'll survive through attrition. Tough bet to make.
Yeah. And a lot of somebody reminded me recently, actually, that whilst AI now is accelerating exponentially in terms of its capability, we have been using, machine learning or some kind of automated process in industry for years, and this is an evolution in that. Okay, it's a huge revolution actually in that, but lots of distributors, wholesalers, warehouses have been optimizing, space, optimizing routes, making everything more efficient via machines taking some of those decisions for a while now. So I think where the jump is, that is now beginning to take ownership of some of our communication with our customers, which previously some of that automation didn't. It was sort of hidden in the background, if you like. Now we've all got access to it, and it can do some of the talking on our behalf. And just psychologically, that makes us nervous, and I fully understand that. But as Jacobi said, let's try something. Let's see if it works. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, that's okay.
Yeah, the idea, thanks for bringing up kind of the AI and ChatGPT LLMs. What that's done, if I get a little opinionated on LinkedIn about some of this stuff, but what that's done is created like what I call armchair expertise, information that's served directly. Now, the internet existed, right? And one of my skills early on was being an expert Googler. Now that's served right directly in a chat window for you, right? So it couldn't have been easier. The difference, though, is, surface level expertise is way different than what someone like Scott here has, being an electrician. And Scott has wisdom.
Yeah.
Wisdom is very different than expertise. And for you distributors that have folks who have been around 20, 30, 40 years, those folks have a lot of wisdom that you can apply to leave a very strong legacy beyond an individual name being present in person. And I think taking advantage of that is really important.
Well said.
Thank you for that compliment, by the way. I have the scars to show.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So at this point, we're going to transition into a case study, and we're going to try to be as smooth as we can in this transition. I'm going to unshare my screen, and Dennis, you're going to take over for a moment.
Well, yeah, I was just interested in this actually relates very closely to our discussion about AI, in fact, because what we've been working on at Virto Commerce is a way to integrate AI in a very practical and sort of pragmatic way. Now, unfortunately, my screen doesn't want to share, so I might just have to describe this and share this with your members offline. But we were talking there about how do you sort of integrate something like that into your normal workflow. Well, what we've decided to do is to implement a sort of image recognition piece. So now we're using this with some customers already. Imagine if you're on a job or on a site, etc., and you have a handwritten order from some member of your team that you need to fulfill. We can now take a photograph of that order using your smartphone and upload that into your e-commerce site. And using image recognition AI, we can actually understand that order, even if that is poorly written. So it could be on a piece of paper, on a piece of drywall, or whatever behind you. Some member of the team has written down, "Gosh, we need to get X or Y," and we can just automate that into the platform and have that order delivered. So that is just like one example of a practical step that we can take in order to enable these AI tools in somebody's e-commerce platform without it somehow becoming, totally disruptive. What's more natural, almost in a sense now for all of us with phones, than to take a snap and then attach it to something easy peasy. So I'm
Yeah,
sorry
it's
that I wasn't
very
able to share that. Sorry, Jacobi, but I will make sure, Scott, that we share that with the participants offline. No problem.
Yeah, these are very common applications again to a small part of the business process here of just order entry in a lot of ways.
Mm.
I would always joke with people, man, if I didn't have to have inside salespeople, log into the ERP and do a manual order entry, that would be fantastic. And what that allowed customers to do, and guys or gals on construction job sites, they're writing orders on a drywall, a piece of pipe, on the back of their hand with a marker. Every surface you could imagine has something written down with a part and a quantity at a lot of times. And so wherever that surface level is, there's a lot of tools and applications like Virto that allows the customer just to upload that thing, like a picture, and it translate that to an order entry pad basically without them having to type, tab, type, tab, type, tab. So these are the cool, small little micro processes that get automated and just save time. Again, it's hard to quantify 7.5 seconds of time, but you add that times thousands on any given day, my gosh, starts to add up.
I think about that capability and when I was on the counter myself, what I thought differentiated me from the maybe folks at my competitors was the fact that I had been in the field and I understood the application of these things and I could think about systems and the kind of the drudgery of taking that list, whatever it was written on when they came in, and taking a kind of a trade terminology and turning it into part numbers. That's a long drawn out process. And the longer the list, the harder it got. And it actually drives behaviors among our people traditionally to do things like change the order in which they work. So take that list on the piece of cardboard and run in the warehouse and collect the parts and write down the part numbers and then enter the order, which seems like a kind of an innocuous thing, but it damages processes downstream. Working for a distributor, Jacobi, I know you realize what that means. You're grabbing material that's maybe committed to somebody else, or maybe the part number you wrote down is not the actual part number of the product you're selling, and it gets very complex. So if that part is made easier, then wow, that's an enabler for those experts, those people with the wisdom in those roles to add value to the customer in ways that they maybe not have had time to do in the past. And the benefit to those people is they can act more effectively, more accurately, and engage in more transactions, which ultimately helps them. What's in it for them is they'll earn more money. They'll be more relevant. Their value and experience is enhanced with those tools. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, the great point, by the way. A lot of the hard work happens after checkout. Okay.
Yes.
In terms of getting the actual things and the right things to that person and the job site or doorstep, whatever it is. Scott, bring up a good point. The further up in a business process something happens, the higher chance of success something downstream may kind of fumble. And all of it is part of the customer experience, by the way, no matter if it's the first step or the last step. And we're not saying the use of AI is going to completely remove human nature and authenticity. It's not, because, I'm a left-handed handwriter. My handwriting's terrible. Okay. And so I don't imagine AI is going to pick up on everything that I do correctly. It still needs to be supervised and, basically seen by a human like Scott, who knows what this thing's talking about in the application, and say, nope, that lowercase a is actually an O because I put a little, curly tail on it, kind of a thing. And again, small mistakes add up to a bad customer experience, though. And so I think these are applications that will supplement, but not be kind of do the heavy lifting for you all the time.
Well said. I would encourage as well, if there is, and I have definitely seen quite some of this in the past. There is a natural resistance to change. I think that is somehow amplified in this discussion about artificial intelligence, which we've just been saying. My advice would be bring everybody into the discussion about how it's going to be applied. And I mean that about all of those digital tools. There are benefits there and barriers for everybody involved, every stakeholder, whether it's customers, people who work in store, sales, marketing, but bring everybody into the discussion, bring them as close as possible so you can understand those benefits and those barriers for everybody. And if people are part of the change, they're more likely, I think, to buy into that.
For sure. And I just want to make a note, this has been an awesome discussion. And I think like you said, we could go on for hours. And I really would like to do that again. Maybe we just continue on, just the three of us talking.
Happy
But I
with
wanted
that.
to move for our audience into takeaways and wrap up. And, what we have noted here is, if we embrace digital now, how will our business look in 5 years? Where will we be?
I think, short answer is an amazing hybrid organization blending both digital and traditional strengths. I think that's the way it looks. And it's a unique thing, it's a cool thing, but it's a blend of both, of just traditional, good old-fashioned roll up the sleeves, brick and mortar branch stuff going on, plus digital at the same time.
Yeah, I think that sounds good to me, Jacobi. And as well, I think, digital will allow businesses to reach far more customers than ever before and bring what's totally unique about them out to that new audience. So if there's something in particular and special that you do, here's a real opportunity to bring that out and give that to service to far more people than ever before.
That's excellent, guys. And I just wanted to say in closing, we agreed at the beginning, if you'd like to continue the conversation with us, any one of us or all of us, we're all LinkedIn. If you reach out to us there, it's a great way to get in touch. And thank you all again so much for your time today in having this discussion. And Jacobi and Dennis, thank you so much for your expertise and being generous with your time.
Thank you,
Pleasure,
Scott.
Scott. Thank you.
Great. See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care.